In the final scene of 1967's Le Samurai, and spoilers inbound from this point, Costello, a hitman who lives under a strict samurai code, walks into a nightclub, checks his hat, puts on his white gloves and approaches the beautiful piano player and draws his gun. The pianist asks him why. "I was paid to," Costello answers. A shot rings out, but it's not from Costello's gun. The hitman clutches his chest and falls to the ground dead. The police have intervened. An officer tells the piano player that she's lucky. Costello would have killed her, but as the gun is inspected, it's found to be empty. He had removed all the bullets beforehand. This French film, directed by Jean-Pierre Melville, is more influential than many people realise. Costello, a man ruled by his own strict code, isolation and detachment from the arbitrary ordering of society, finds solace in maintaining control over this society with bold and precise action. A template for the struggling loner type that has ruled modern cinema, demonstrated in films that it inspired, like The Conversation, Leon the Professional, Ghost Dog, The Driver and Drive. Another descendant of and inspired by Le Samurai, which is perhaps the film that defined this loner genre moving forward, is Martin Scorsese's masterpiece Taxi Driver. Since Taxi Driver has also drawn numerous comparisons to the newest addition to the genre, Joker, naturally a distorted through line exists from Le Samurai all the way to Joker, with key elements lost along the way. But what happened to them? I'm Tom from Screen On Point, and this is Joker, Taxi Driver, and the distortion of loner cinema. Arthur Fleck, who ultimately becomes the Joker in this DC universe, is the loner of interest in Joker. Stereotypical for such an anti-hero protagonist, Fleck is mentally disturbed. His manic brooding and gallivanting in the streets of early 80s Gotham City is impossible to separate from Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, is a 26-year-old Vietnam veteran who suffers from insomnia and takes up a job as a cab driver. And 1970s New York City, a dark, confusing, crime-riddled place, Bickle sees himself as an outsider in a society that he doesn't approve of, just as Fleck does in Gotham, who feels victimized by thugs and elites in the infamous DC Comic City. This comparison isn't simply a theory. Joker's writer and director Todd Phillips credited Taxi Driver and other 70s and 80s character studies with informing the look and feel of the movie. In fact, Phillips explicitly stated that Joker was conceived when he said to himself,
"Well, why can't you do genre film in the comic book world?"
Another movie that inspired Todd Phillips, which fits comfortably in the loner canon, is The King of Comedy. Also directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Robert De Niro, this 1982 film is about Rupert Pupkin, a friendless, loveless, aspiring stand-up comic who is obsessed with fame and begins to stalk his comedy hero. Joker's connection to The King of Comedy is so overt that Phillips actually put De Niro in the film to thwart accusations of plagiarism with homage. This time, De Niro plays the comedy legend that Fleck idolizes instead of the Fleck-like character he played in King of Comedy. Like Pupkin, Fleck wants to be a stand-up comedian. Aspiring for something greater than one has is what drives most loner protagonists. Fleck wants to make people laugh, Pupkin wants fame, Bickle wants acceptance, and Costello wants to feel for another person. But amongst those names, unlike Fleck, Pupkin, and Bickle, Jeff Costello from Le Samurai isn't glamorized. He pays the ultimate price for his lifestyle, a lifestyle that he regimentally tried to hide using samurai code. Unlike Fleck, Pupkin and Bickle, who desire and ultimately find their fame in their wrongdoings, Fleck becoming idolized, Pupkin getting his stand-up routine, and Bickle being praised as a local hero, if you don't read into it as a dying dream sequence. But Costello, he dies alone and generally uncared for. And looking at the directors Todd Phillips and Martin Scorsese, unlike Jean-Pierre Melville, the two have made careers glorifying their anti-heroes outside of loner cinema. Old great famed films from Scorsese like Raging Bull, to new commercial successes The Wolf of Wall Street, all the way to Todd Phillips' commercial comedy The Hangover. Ultimately, we see bad characters who have done bad things come out unscathed, celebrated and sometimes rewarded. Jake from Raging Bull, despite his arrest for introducing underage girls to men in his own club, closes, in his own words, as the boss to a maxed out auditorium. Jordan from The Wolf of Wall Street, despite stock market manipulation, is admired in seminars, and the gang from The Hangover, they enjoy a successful wedding and reception after kidnapping, breaking and entering and robbery throughout Las Vegas. All harmless though, because they have comedic elements, right? Films from Melville, however, sees his protagonists meet their eventual demise. On top of Le Samurai, Melville's other notable notable films, Le Doulos and Le Cercle Rouge, end in a similar manner, with those anti-heroes getting their comeuppance. Interestingly, unlike Fleck and Bickle, who take quarrel with the morality of modern America, despite Gotham City being fictional, Melville's lawless characters were manifestations created by the Second World War, and specifically from being a fighter in the French resistance. To him, it was the rebels who he empathised with, because the obedient middle-class law-abiding citizens who kept their noses clean of resistance, well, they were the ones to collaborate with the Nazis. They were the enemies. Yet despite this context, Melville still wrote his protagonist to die. Perhaps it was just compliance with the time that he needed to be commercial enough to be screened.
Le film se doit d'être commercial. C'est avant tout un produit, une position honnête et c'est une position d'artiste. Il faut plaire.
Or maybe he felt that wrongdoings, despite intent, should be damned. Jumping back into narrative, a common recurring theme in loner cinema is the protagonist's struggle to form meaningful relationships with other characters. Jeff Costello is mesmerised by a beautiful lounge pianist, Travis Bickle becomes besotted with Betsy, a campaign volunteer for a presidential candidate, and Fleck finds love for Sophie Dumont, a single mother living in the Lower East Side of Gotham. Unlike Taxi Driver, however, in Le Samurai, Costello doesn't want social interaction. Despite his surface level relationship with Jane, he intentionally distances himself from any emotional involvement to serve and be true to his samurai code.
Tu as besoin de moi?
Non.
Si. Qu'est-ce que je dois faire? Qu'est-ce que je dois faire, chef?
Bickle, on the other hand, a Vietnam veteran who struggles to find purpose back from war, is actively wanting social interaction, and more specifically to find love. His frequent visits to pornographic theatres and the fact that he gets this taxi driver job in the first place only amplifies this desire, and his diary of aphorisms only serves to prove that he seeks fulfillment in life. This loneliness, however, despite his best efforts, is the catalyst to his mental state and the violent path he ends up taking. A judgment error for Bickle by taking Betsy to a porn theatre causes her to reject him, a rejection that he takes particularly hard and damages his opportunity to fulfill those social needs. And biologically, we've been engineered to care deeply for those social needs. Professor John Cacioppo, former director of the University of Chicago's Center for Cognitive and Social Neuroscience, suggests loneliness is a bodily function like hunger. Hunger makes you pay attention to your physical needs, whereas loneliness makes you pay attention to your social needs. Louise Hawkley, author of Loneliness Matters, a theoretical and empirical review of consequences and mechanisms, notes that your body cares about social needs because it was originally used to indicate how likely you were to survive. Over years of natural selection, our ancestors were rewarded for collaboration and the bonds that we made with each other, and with that our brains became more fine-tuned to understand and recognise what others thought and felt. Working together meant better chances of survival, whereas being alone meant higher chances of death. So in turn, one of the most dangerous threats to survival was working against the social vibe of your group and being excluded. Cacioppo goes on to say that to avoid this exclusion, your body came up with social pain, a warning to help stop the behaviour that could end up isolating you. Ancestors who experienced social pain were more likely to alter this behaviour when they got rejected, saving themselves from exclusion and keeping their place in the tribe, while those who didn't alter their behaviour got kicked out and most likely died. That's why rejections hurt and why loneliness is so painful. For Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, his rejection was met with shame, a refusal to self-examine and a refusal to change, and therefore he spiraled in on himself. Instead, he dedicated time to things that he himself could physically change, starting with his appearance with strenuous physical training and a haircut. This rejection from Betsy acts as a catalyst to the belief for Bickle that society became the tribe that excluded him, became the enemy, and from his point of view, didn't understand him. This convinces Bickle that the only way out is to kill or be killed, a certainly deranged mental trap that you are given a glimpse into through masterful storytelling. And this certainly isn't anything new in Todd Phillips' Joker and the Joker character, as shades of these nihilistic views that Arthur Fleck demonstrates as our anti-hero can be seen in Heath Ledger's performance as the antagonist in The Dark Knight Rises.
See, their morals, their code, it's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
Of course, unlike his warped perception on morals, later on in the film humanity prevails and shows compassion to one another, depicting social need triumphing over acts of violence. In Le Samurai, it could be argued that this is what Costello ultimately chooses. His love for the pianist eventually conflicts with the solitude of his samurai code, and with his life in disarray, the police closing in on him, he chooses order over violence, something that knowingly will cost him his own life. Throughout the film, the pianist is presented as such a beacon of light. She contrasts the dull colours of Costello's isolation with vibrant colour, and also seemingly represents Costello's attraction for music, his only possession of course being a songbird trapped in a cage. And in his death, he sacrifices any hope of happiness and of course a life with the pianist. This he is at peace with, knowing it will restore order to the people around him and act as an honourable end to a life where he himself has taken so many others. Unlike Le Samurai Drive, the 2011 action drama directed by Nicholas Winding Refn follows a very similar set of themes and remains a great resemblance of original loner cinema. Side by side, Costello and the driver not only look the same, they also act similarly. Unlike Bickle in Taxi Driver, who is driven by his own inner monologue and sense of personal injustice, Costello and the driver barely speak. They choose their words wisely and display signs of minimalism. In both Le Samurai and Drive, Costello and the driver live in organised, tidy apartments, whereas Bickle lives in chaos, which represents his irrational mental state. For Costello and the driver, they kill because they have to.
Voilà 2 autres millions. Payés d'avance cette fois. Pour une autre opération du même genre.
Whereas Bickle kills because he wants to. Ultimately, the driver leaves Irene, driving off wounded after being stabbed, knowing that without him she'll have a better life, sacrificing his own happiness much like Costello does in his death. And interestingly for Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle walks unknowingly into another DC comic book character's famous words,
"You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain."
Two options for Bickle that interestingly can be seen in both interpretations of the ending, in his death on the couch, dying as a hero in his own mind, and the final shot of him with his reaction in the rear view mirror, seeing himself become the villain. Of course, these two options are very self-serving. When looking back at loner characters in cinema, protagonists as anti-heroes is nothing new, but somewhere down the line, specifically highlighted in this video with Taxi Driver, loners stopped being represented like Jeff Costello in Le Samurai with a code of honour and eventual moral purpose, but instead shifted and altered into chaotic depictions of messy crime with self-driven reasons that ultimately, in the case of Joker, go idolised. This, of course, more than anything, is a really fascinating insight to where we are now as a species. Long gone are the days of social need for survival, because modern culture focuses on the individual. It tells you to focus on yourself. As a society with modern technology, we're closer than we could ever be, but in reality, we're as detached from one another as we've ever been. Through social media, everyone has a voice, but the problem is it's a fight to be heard. And when it's a fight, do words really matter anymore? For Arthur Fleck and Travis Bickle, maybe not. Instead of self-reflection, they take to violence. Thanks so much to Shane Fraser for helping me write this essay. Thanks for watching that video. Please do like and subscribe. We upload 2 tasty and tenderized videos a week to sink your teeth into, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to follow us at Screen On Point and Tom A. Ransom on Twitter to satisfy my narcissistic need for acceptance and love, and you make sure you have a wonderful day.